Hello everybody, I'm HappyFace, and welcome to my Cuphead boss ranking. Now, I'm going to change a few things about my boss rankings. First, I'm going to take out the kind of title before every boss that lasts about 5 seconds. I feel like it makes the video run a lot slower, and I wish it would just go from place to place a little bit quicker and smoother, so I'm just going to take that out. Second, I'm going to make the intro shorter. I know this one won't be, considering I'm saying these things now, but in the future, expect that. And finally, I'm not going to explain the boss, I'm just going to explain what makes the boss good or bad. If I have to use a little bit of explanation to make you understand why I don't like or do like something, then I will, but I'm mostly just going to say I don't like the boss for this reason, or I do like the boss for this reason, rather than saying this is all the things the boss can do. And with all of that wrapped up, let's get on to the video. Now, before I get really negative about this boss, I just want to say that I think most bosses in Cuphead are placed very well in progression, balanced very well, and incredibly fun to fight. Except for one. Sally's stage play is absolutely, without a doubt in my mind, the worst boss in the entire game. There's two big reasons I don't like it. Number one is balancing. The first, third, and fourth phases are so easy, with the first one just being kind of her running at you and it really having nothing interesting. The third one, it literally tells you what attack is coming. You don't have to read a tell, you don't have to wait and find out what it is and then dodge accordingly. No, it literally tells you what's going to happen and you just have to dodge it effectively, and it almost requires no skill. And then the fourth phase is a jumping simulator. This is a World 3 boss. We've moved past this. Come on, guys. And then there's a second phase, which is absolutely ridiculous and incredibly hard for me. I always end up taking at least 1 or 2 damage, and it just makes the fight feel super stupid because it's like taking forever, and I don't know, man. I really just do not like this fight. The other problem is it's so boring. I just find it to be the most lame boss out of all of them in the entire game. I find that most bosses have these really cool themes or really interesting designs or awesome monsters, whatever, but it's just a normal human on a playset. It's not really interesting. Even the other normal humans had more character to them, and I just find Sally to be the most boring character in the entire game. So because of this, I definitely think Sally is the worst boss in the game. And number 24 is Jimmy the Great. Now, I think this boss, again, falls victim to just being very simple and basic. I don't think he's necessarily that bad, I just find him to be a lot worse than the rest of his counterparts in Isle 2. His first phase is one of the attacks where you can get 3 different things, which I think is very interesting, but I find that in most phases where you have something like this, there's like one that you really want and one that you really don't want. Here I feel like they're all about the same, and it feels almost the same to dodge most of them, so I feel like there's almost no variety, even though it's supposed to feel like a different attack. His second phase is the entire reason he's better than Sally, though. I think having to destroy the right part of the pillars while their saw blades moving is amazing. In most plane battles, I like to stick toward the wall, but I find here having to move around the entire arena to just be so entertaining and fun. Then there's Sit at the Top of the Screen Simulator, the same attack 4 times in a row simulator, and then the last phase where he just doesn't attack enough. I know that sounds crazy, I want a boss to be more difficult, but I just feel in his last phase, he just kind of sits there. There's an attack every so often, but I feel like you're at that point in the fight where you can kind of just DPS him down and kill him, especially if you have like 2 health. So it seems almost pointless. It's only there to kind of be like a surprise for you. It's like, oh my goodness, he's huge, and then that might get a damage off on you, but that's about it. Otherwise, it's just a very simple fight with an awesome second phase. At number 23 is the king of basic himself, Goopy Legrand. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. He is the first boss after all, so all he does is jumping isn't really necessarily a bad thing, since that's pretty much all you're going to be able to deal with at this point in the game. For the very beginning of the game, this is incredibly difficult when you just have the basic pea shooter and probably don't know how to play very well, so I will give him that, but on a repeat playthrough he is incredibly easy. But my issue comes with the second phase. It's basically the same as the first phase, he's just a little bigger. Now, I know I said it's okay that he's this simple considering the point he's placed at in the game, but this just seems lazy that it's the same phase twice in a row. The third phase is fantastic with the gravestone, I absolutely love dodging that, but I feel like I just can't get past the fact that they basically made the same boss twice. I do find the third phase to be a really good early game challenge, but once you've learned it, it's actually really fun and definitely the best part of the Goopy fight. So, I can't say Goopy's bad, I just feel like he's a little lazy. If you would ask me before I made this list what the worst bosses were going to be, I would have said Sally and number 22, Rumor Honeybottoms. I think this boss is really fun, but I think that the platform gimmick is what messes it up. I don't hate the platform gimmick. For example, Grimmatchstick, who has a similar kind of thing, is fantastic and one of my favorite bosses in the entire game. So what makes Rumor bad? Well, the fact that some platforms just aren't there for some reason. Sometimes when you're doing the platforming, there just isn't a platform where you need it to be, which is really annoying when she has certain attacks that almost require you to stand next to the wall to be able to dodge them effectively, or at least incredibly close to it. It can also make it really annoying to traverse the arena, which is already annoying that it's constantly moving on you, but it makes it even worse by the fact that sometimes you just jump and there isn't something there and then you take damage by falling down. I find the third phase especially to be incredibly fun, but the second phase is so simple. She has 3 attacks. One of them is either terrible if there's not enough platforms, or just super easy if there is, and the other 2 are just the most basic things ever. So the only redeeming quality about this boss is the third phase, which is an absolute blast. The problem is it ends way too quickly because you can super her before she even starts the phase. So I just feel like Rumor Honeybottoms needed either a little bit more health in the third phase or a little bit less health in the absolutely boring second phase. And number 21 is the very first boss in the game, which is the Root Pack. Now, I think this boss is incredibly simple, but I think that's totally fine. The fact that each root only has 1 attack is still very good. I think for the beginning of the game, that's completely fine and exactly what the player needs. It teaches you how to jump, it teaches you how to deal with stuff falling from the ceiling, and it teaches you how to deal with 2 things coming at you at once. It's very simple, yet it works very well, and I find it to be an incredibly entertaining fight. I find the character of all of these 3 vegetables to just be some of the best in the entire game, and I find it to be a fantastic idea. Fighting a vegetable, that's just genius. And number 20 is Ribby and Croaks, and this is a serious step up from the Root Pack, not only in difficulty, but also in gameplay. There is so many things happening at once in this fight, and it is an incredible step up from everything you've done by this point. It is by far the hardest Inkwell Isle 1 boss, but I still don't think it's placed poorly. I think having a difficult boss in the first area makes sense, considering this is a very difficult game. It teaches you what's going to happen in the future when you're going to get your butt whooped by some of the later bosses. I find the attacks to all be very fair, except maybe some of the expert mode ones, but I'm ranking this based on normal mode, so that doesn't really come into play here. And that's not even mentioning the best part of the fight. I think we're now getting into the fights that are actually pretty good, and the slot machine of Ruby and Croaks definitely shows that. This phase is incredible, having 3 different attacks to choose from, all of them feeling so different, unlike Jimmy, like I said earlier, where all of the attacks just feel kind of the same. Not here. All of them are incredibly different and incredibly fun to dodge, and I find this to be one of the greatest phases of the entire game. On top of that, it's just hilarious. The fact that the frogs merge together into a slot machine is one of the funniest things in the entire game. Even despite me putting this at number 20 out of 25, I still think this is an absolutely incredible boss, and that just goes to show how good the boss quality of Cuphead is. You would expect the devil to be the hardest boss, but this is ridiculous. I know he's the final boss and he's supposed to be difficult, but I find this fight to be incredibly difficult. In the first phase, I don't really have any problems with it except one. He can do this attack where he spawns a fire in the middle of the screen with 4 blue fires rotating around it. This attack is the worst part of the entire phase, and if I get it, I literally just instant reset. I hate this attack so much, and it put the devil down probably about 3 spots solely because of that. The second phase I think is absolutely fantastic. There is nothing bad I can say about it, but the third phase has one small complaint. The enemies on the sides that shoot skulls at you don't respawn randomly. If they're both gone, the first one will always spawn on the left, which makes the fight easier, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I find the randomness to have made that a lot better. And my biggest complaint about this fight is the fourth phase. I find it to be so pointless. He has like almost no health, so you maybe have to dodge like 1, maybe 2 attacks, but it's also really not that hard. I think it would have just been better without that phase, or if they had made it into like a really serious last phase rather than like just him crying for a few seconds. The other thing I really like about the devil in this game is that he's not really creepy. He's just kind of a funny cartoon character, but I think that's fine. The devil doesn't necessarily have to be scary, he just has to be the villain, and I think Cuphead does that really well by making him seem like a funny character, but also keeping him incredibly evil. I think that was a really good way of portraying this character, and despite me really hating that one attack in the first phase, I could not keep the devil below this on the list since he's just a fantastic character for the game. Number 18 is Mortimer Freeze, and like Ruby and Croaks, I don't necessarily think this is a bad boss. I just feel like there are 17 bosses in the game that are better than him. I think the reason that I put him here is mainly because of his first phase. He only has 3 attacks, and most of them are kind of boring, but the fact that he can pair the minions with the other attacks makes them super annoying, and him being a hitbox taking up basically the entire top of the screen since of how fast he moves is just, I don't know if I like it that much. But second and third phase have almost no complaints from me. I find them to be really entertaining and not even bad in expert mode where some bosses get a little bit too crazy for me. I find the eye striking in the same place to be kind of stupid since it makes it just be like, okay, I need to stand in the right spot. But since they're moving platforms, it does make that difficult to execute, and so I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. And number 17 is Baroness von Bon Bon. Now, I don't find this to be the most fun boss fight, but it was definitely the most creative boss. The fact that there's 5 mini-bosses and you get 3 of them every fight is incredible, along with a very consistent final phase that I just really enjoy. My biggest issue with it is that it's very simple, especially for World 2, but considering the randomness, it makes you have to learn 5 bosses instead of just 3, so I think that is pretty good and does make the fight a lot better, and it makes it feel like every single fight is different. Even if there's only 5 mini-bosses to choose from, you're going to get a different combination of 3 almost every time. My main issue with this fight actually comes in the final phase. Despite me really liking dodging the attacks, I just find it takes way too long. Unless you use a homing weapon, it's so hard to hit her because you have to stand up on the platform. And standing up there is impossible for long periods of time because her head's track so well that you're up there for a second and then you have to leave in order to dodge the head. I find this to just be really annoying and just mainly there to make the fight take longer, which isn't necessarily a good thing. Despite me enjoying this phase, I just feel like it drags on way too long. Agni Carnation is a really good and fun boss that's held back by one major flaw, and that being the seed attack. I actually think the seed attack is very creative, and the seeds that it spawns normally are very fun. However, the parryable seeds are just way too strong. And I was thinking, oh, we'll just parry them, and then they don't cause a problem. Yes, but also then you have to get to wherever they are. If they fall on the other side of the map where you are, then just say goodbye, because you're going to have to deal with those parryable seeds, and they're such a pain to deal with. The rest of the fight is amazing. I love the second phase attacks with the boomerang and all that stuff, and the final phase is perfect. It makes a great spin on the platform gimmick while still keeping the fight very fun. I also love that he has those pollen clumps, which not only cause you to take a damage, but also distort your vision. It makes it more of a punishment for missing dodging an attack that is very easy to dodge because they move so slow. I find that to just be the best part of the fight, and I find that if it wasn't for that stupid parryable seed, this could have easily been a top 10 boss. Chef Saltbaker is a phenomenal boss that I would have put in the top 10 except for one thing. That stupid fireball in the first and second phase. You already have to deal with way too much stuff in this fight, and a homing fireball just makes it even worse. I find myself getting hit by either paying attention too much to the fireball and then getting hit by something else, or I'm not paying enough attention to the fireball because why would you? It's just one little fireball, and then it ends up clobbering me for half my health throughout the entire course of the fight. My other issue is the third phase because it basically just doesn't even exist. It also seems so fair with the first attack. Basically, he just drops on your head and it's almost guaranteed damage from me. But the other 3 phases are incredible, again, other than the fireball. The fact that he uses the ingredients in the first phase from the rest of the DLC is incredible and very fun to deal with. The second phase is even better, with you having to hit pepper shakers instead of the boss. I love the animation of them flying into his face, and their attacks are incredibly fair. So are him throwing the leaves. I find this phase to be fantastic, and I have no problems with it other than that fireball. And then the fourth phase. Dude, the fourth phase is peak cinema. It is so good. The fact that you have to deal with the crumbling ground around you and the platforms barely even existing, while the boss is actually helping you by being a parryable target that can get you some extra height, is incredible. It's a great idea, and it flows so well in that phase. So because of that, I think Chef Saltbaker is a really solid boss that's held back by a few minor issues. Glumpstone is another boss just like Saltbaker that's held back because of one minor problem. Now, I think his first phase is incredible. The fact that you have to stand on constantly moving platforms, meanwhile the ground is basically lava with gnomes popping out of it if you stay there too long, is incredible. I think his attacks are very simple, but that's okay considering you have moving platforms that you have to stand on the entire time. Then there's the second phase, which is the entire reason that I dislike this fight. I can never do it in a reasonable amount of time because I just feel like it takes way too long to get through. I never do enough damage, and I always have to pay way too much attention to dodging because there's so much stuff happening on the screen at the same time. I always have to pay attention to the nose, which doesn't seem like it should have been the main focus. The ball seems like it should have been the hardest part of the fight, but instead I always find myself staring at the ground, making sure a gnome's not going to pop up and damage me. Then, the reason this fight gets saved is the final phase. I love this final phase so much. It might be one of my favorite phases in the entire game. The idea is great. Going inside of a stomach of a giant and fighting his stomach is just hilarious. And the even funnier part is that you have a platforming gimmick, but this one is actually really good. The fact that you can decide when you want to get the platforms back is incredible. You can either wait for him to get rid of a lot of platforms, so there's a high reward in getting them back, or you can just get them back as soon as he allows you by just parrying the bone as soon as it lands. Both of these options are incredibly viable, and it makes this phase incredibly fun to do, and that's exactly why I love Glumpstone the Giant, because of the final phase. Number 13 is Grim Matchstick, and if you saw my Cuphead Deathless video, you would know I have quite the history with this boss. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I still really like this fight. The first phase has very simple attacks, but because his tail pops up out of the ground, it still makes it feel very difficult. It makes it feel like you always have to pay attention to where you are, and cutting off half the platforms is pretty solid. I also find the cloud platforms in this fight to work a lot better than honey bottoms, except in the final phase. If there isn't a platform at the top when he does the flamethrower, it's way too unfair and almost impossible to dodge. The second phase is definitely the weakest part of this fight. I don't necessarily think it's bad, I just feel like it's underwhelming that you're only really dealing with the fireballs and not Grim himself. I do like how the fireballs have different facial expressions depending if they're going to just walk across the bottom of the screen or if they're going to jump up at you or not, but the real part of this fight is the third phase. I love the third phase so much, but I feel like it's kind of backwards. Shouldn't the flamethrower have been the really difficult and hard to dodge attack and not just the basic fireballs that he shoots out throughout the entire course of the fight? Because it's kind of the opposite of that. Doesn't mean I don't like it. I actually do enjoy the flamethrower being a nice breath of fresh air considering how hard the fireballs are to dodge. I just feel like the flamethrower should have been the more difficult part of the fight since of how epic it is. I love that his entire face turns into a flamethrower, and the three-headed dragon is just such a cool look that makes Grimmastic an absolutely great boss. Also, this is an incredibly hard boss. This is just the end of Aisle 2. We're not even in the third aisle yet, let alone the last one. And this is still one of the hardest bosses in the game for me, even to this day. And number 12 is the Moonshine Mob, and I absolutely love this first phase. The little guy walking around while dropping bombs from the ceiling is just hilarious. I do love that the bombs can be triggered, but it risks you taking damage, and I also love how well the guys are telegraphed in the background. If those guys just popped out of there and started attacking you, that would be really annoying. But the fact that they're telegraphed by being invisible and then they pop out of the background and start running at you makes it seem really fair. My favorite part of this fight is that they're not really directly attacking you. It's the police officers versus the moonshiners fighting each other, and I think that's a really cool gimmick. You're just caught in the crossfire of it, and they're not really attacking you until the final phase. The second phase is great. I do love the gramophone in the middle. I think it's hilarious, and I also think that the barrels are a really good addition to make it so you can't just stay on one part of it and invincibility roll the whole time. My one issue is at the end of the phase, sometimes the lady will just run straight at you, and it just seems almost like a bug, and I really don't like it. Then there's third phase, which is my least favorite part of this fight. I actually really like the attacks, but I just don't know a consistent way to do damage. I always feel like the phase drags on a little bit too much longer than I would like it to. Then there is the actual final phase, which is like the secret phase, and I think it's hilarious that they have a fake knockout, which is a great fake out for this fight. I really like the final phase, and I think it's pretty easy, but it's still a really good way to make you under pressure at the end of the fight. And overall, I think Moonshine Mob is a very solid fight. And number 11 is Wally Warbles. Now, my biggest issue with the first phase is that all you have to do is hug the back wall. This is fixed in expert mode, but again, I'm not judging based off the expert mode, so we did lose a few points here. The other issue is that the bullet attack in the first phase feels very out of place. I'm not complaining because it's fun to dodge, but it just doesn't feel like a bird should be shooting bullets at you. Then there's the bullet hell second phase, where I actually really enjoy dodging the bullet hell. My issue is that if he does it at the very top or bottom of the screen, you cannot dodge him while shooting him, and it makes the fight take almost twice as long. This is really annoying to me, and it feels like something that should have been a bug that should have been patched, because it just makes the fight longer, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just complete luck. Then we move on to the third phase, which is definitely the hardest in the entire fight, but I think it's really fun. Moving in and out of the eggs is a really solid movement to do, and there's plenty of parries, so you can use supers often to get invincibility frames, and it just feels really smooth. But, of course, they had to ruin it with the final phase. Why, oh why, is his stomach hitbox twice as big as it looks? You will just be hovering slightly above him, and all of a sudden you take 1 billion damage from his stomach, even though you're not even close to it. The attacks that him and the doctors shoot out in this phase really not that much of a problem, but that stupid stomach hitbox makes me angry every single time, because that's the best place to be when he's on the far side, when you can't just stand over him and bomb him. And number 10 is Beppy the Clown, and finally we get the worst phase first. I think this first phase isn't really bad, it's just boring. He doesn't really do anything. He just charges back and forth on the screen, and that's about it. Then there's the balloon phase, which I absolutely love. I think they come out of predetermined portions, makes it a lot more fun, and it makes it so that it doesn't feel like it's your fault when you get hit by one of them spawning. The trains are also incredible, and I find them to be a really good addition to the fight. They have the nose parry, which is a very high-risk, high-reward thing, and the only time I find them bad is in the third phase. If he does the yellow horse attack and a train comes at like the same time, it's impossible to not get hit, because you can't jump or else you'll get hit by the yellow horseshoes, and you can't not jump because otherwise the train will run you over. Other than that, this third phase is pretty much perfect, because the green attacks are a lot more fun, the yellow ones are good to deal with, and the fact that you can stand under him, it makes it very rewarding if there's not a train coming and you know how to do it. Then there's final phase. This is one of those phases that would be dang near impossible if it wasn't the final phase. There is so much stuff happening at once, and it is incredibly hard to dodge his attacks. But I still find them to be fun. I think the train is very fair, because you can stay up on the carousel, and the penguins are able to be taken out. So it's not terrible, it's just really difficult, and I know I like that. Briny has one of my favorite elements to his fight, where their attacks just layer throughout the entire fight. He gains a new attack basically every phase, but he keeps all of the old ones, which make it just more chaotic as the fight goes on. I find all of the creatures that he spawns to be really fun to deal with, especially the squid. I know it seems kind of dumb, but the fact that it's the only one that doesn't make an audio cue, I think is a good thing. I think it means that, okay, if you hear an audio cue, you know which one's coming, and if you don't hear an audio cue, you know it's going to be the squid. And I don't find the inking of the screen to be annoying. Like I said earlier with Cagney, I like attacks that do more than just hurt you. These ones don't even hurt you, they just blot your screen out, and I think that's a really cool addition to the fight. The barrel plus cannonball can be really annoying, considering the fact that if you are in the wrong place and the barrel is not triggered, you can just take instant damage from it. But that's a really rare thing to happen, especially for keeping track of the barrel, so it can be easily avoided. Then there's the amazing transition to the final phase, followed by one of my favorite attacks in the entire game. It is just awesome to watch this guy fire his laser beam every single time. The fire attacks are also really fun, even though I don't hear them mentioned very much. And if you're playing Miss Chalice, the barrel is completely neglected in this phase because of the invincibility roll. So because of all of this, Briny Beard got a lot higher than I thought he was going to, but you know what? I think he belongs here. It's a really solid fight, and it definitely deserves a spot in the top 10. And number 8 is Hildeberg, and I absolutely love this fight. I'll get my negative out of the way, that being the constellations. If you have bombs, Tauros is really easy, which I know you don't normally have them at this point in the game, but when you come back to do them on expert mode, it's incredibly simple. Then there's the twins, who are just also incredibly boring, and then I feel like Cupid is way harder than both of the other two. His attacks are incredibly brutal to dodge, and I almost always take at least 1 damage during that fight. I do love that there's plenty of parries during this fight. I feel like there are some fights where getting parries are too difficult, and in plane battles especially, that's really bad. I do love that her attacks layer throughout the fight, just starting with basic ha-has, eventually moving on to having tornadoes and other crazy attacks, makes it very interesting. Then, of course, there's a reason this fight is so great, which is the moon phase. Not only is this phase transition hilarious and also a little bit terrifying, because you have to realize now that you have to fight this thing, but it's also just a really fun fight. The stars flying across the screen are a good challenge, because if you don't pay attention to them, you might die. You probably don't notice them at first, but after playing for a little bit, you will definitely realize they're there. And, of course, the UFOs and the whole mechanical part of the fight is just so interesting. And number 7 is Esther Winchester, and I really love this fight. The first phase just has too much going on in it for me to put it any higher, though. I find myself being way too confused on what I was supposed to dodge in this phase, because there is so much stuff. The dynamite bird is easily my least favorite part of it, because that shrapnel is terrifying to deal with, and it can persist into the second phase. I don't have much to say about the second phase, considering it's just a really solid phase, but it's also very simple and just really good. I don't have any complaints or really any huge positives about it. Then there's the third phase, which I think is really interesting, because instead of having to dodge the boss, you just dodge the things that are in the arena. The cans of sausages are the main difficulty to dodge, not the actual stuff Esther throws at you. And then there's final phase, which I think is so funny. The fact that you have to dodge sausages flying off the top and bottom of the screen is just so cool. But I find it to be really fair. Despite being difficult, it just all feels really solid, and because of that, I think Esther is a very solid boss that definitely deserves a spot in the top 10. And number 6 is Dr. Call's robot. I absolutely love the design of this boss, and at first I really hated it, but once I started to get good at it, I found this to be a really fun fight. I love that you can destroy the different parts of his body in different orders in the first phase, depending on which ones you think are the most harmful. My biggest problem is that why on earth would you ever destroy the middle anything other than last? The arms are by far the hardest part of this fight. The magnet is horrible, and it is why I always choose to just instant super the second his heart comes out, because dealing with that thing sucks. The second phase is kind of just filler, but if you don't super it, it's actually really fun. I find that going back and forth and across the screen while there's bombs flying at you makes it so you're under a lot of pressure, and it actually is a really fun fight. Then there's the last phase, which is another bullet hell just like Wally, except this one is so much better. Not only is it really difficult, but there's also more than just the bullets on the screen, and it makes it so brutal to dodge, but also so rewarding to finally complete it. Because of all these things, I think Dr. Call is a fantastic boss that's just outside the top 5. And number 5 is King Dice. Now, I think this is one of the greatest bosses in the entire game. The only reason it's not higher is because it's a little bit too simple for me. Most of the mini-bosses only have 1 or 2 attacks, and they're all pretty samey throughout. So because of that, I had to put it only at the bottom of the top 5 instead of near the top. My other problem is the difficulty balancing sucks. Why would you ever fight Mr. Chimes when you could fight Mangosteen instead? Like, it's literally 10 times easier and a no-brainer every single time you're going through this fight. I love that it ends with basically a parry challenge, and parrying the cards for King Dice over and over again just feels so satisfying. In all, King Dice does his job very well at being a 5-minute penultimate challenge right before the devil, and I absolutely love this fight every single time I go through the game. At number 4 is the Phantom Express, and I think the main reason this boss place is so high is because of the cart. I find the cart moving gimmick to be really fun to play, and I just think it feels like it's so much more your fault when you take damage when you control the floor. I don't like the last phase very much because it feels like the cart doesn't really make much of an impact in there, and it also just feels too much like a bullet hell to me. Otherwise, though, I really enjoy this fight. I don't think there's too much to say about it other than it's really fun and it just feels very fair. The fact that the bosses are simple, but the enemies are also trying to move the cart for you is really good. It makes it so instead of just concentrating on the boss, you have to concentrate on more things at once, and it's just a really solid fight. I find it to also be one of the best themes in the game, being a haunted train. It's just perfect. Everything in this fight works for me, and because of that, I put it in the top 5. And number 3 is the final plain boss of the game, and it is, of course, Calamaria. I think this is an absolutely phenomenal fight. The fact that there is so many different combos of attacks that she can do with sea creatures and the attacks that she does herself is so interesting. It means you have to learn how to dodge so many more things than just 1 or 2 attacks, and I absolutely love that. Then, the turning to stone part used to make me really dislike this fight. But as soon as I learned how to dodge it, it actually became really fun. It made it feel more like a speed bump that you had to learn rather than an attack that was unfair and just there to annoy you. I also think that the second phase, Electric Eels, are really fun and fair to dodge, and the third phase, right next to King Dice, might be one of the most creative things this entire game does. The fact that the entire difficulty of it is flying through a tunnel is awesome. The fact that instead of having to deal with dodging the boss, you have to deal with dodging the walls of the tunnel and all of the other traps placed within it is perfect. It's something that I never thought this game would do, and it just plays so well, and I love it. Because of that, Calamaria is an absolutely fantastic boss, well deserving of a spot in the top 3. And number 2 is the best boss in the base game, Werner Werman. Now, before we even talk about the gameplay of this fight, it is a weaponized soup can with a rat living in it. And it's based off of Tom and Jerry, so therefore it literally cannot be bad. And it is one of the few ground fights in the entire game that I actually prefer to play as Cuphead. It just feels so much smoother, and I think that's a really huge compliment, especially considering Miss Chalice made the game way easier, but still managed to make this fight feel the exact same as it did on release. I think that all of his attacks in the first phase are incredibly fun to dodge and all very fair, and the telegraphing of the saw blades on the wall in the second phase is just perfect. My only complaint about this fight is that it's a little bit too short. I feel like this fight does not last nearly as long as it should, and only lasts about a minute, which is kind of sad for a World 3 boss. The cat is not only an awesome surprise, but also a really fun phase to do. It's a little bit simple, but that's not a problem because it's very, very packed full of attacks, and I think that's really good. All of these things, to me, make Werner Werman not only deserving of the number 2 spot, but maybe even considered for number 1, because this fight is just almost perfect. There was no question what was going to be number 1. The Howling Aces has always been my favorite boss from the moment that I fought it on release day of the DLC. This fight is perfect. Yeah, sure, it's a little bit simple, but that's not a bad thing. The DLC is really difficult, and having a nice little breath of fresh air here is amazing. I absolutely love this fight, and it's just so fun to play through. I wouldn't say it's the best designed, the most difficult, the most interesting, but it's just my favorite. It's just the most fun for me to play through every single time, and I absolutely love it. I love that the final phase has the screen flipping on your head the whole time, and I just think that's so cool. The fact that you have to worry about more than just attacks is amazing. And, just like Phantom Express, you control the platform, so it always feels like your fault when you weren't in the right place, and that makes the final phase work so much better. Just watching the footage of me fighting this makes me want to log on to Cuphead and start fighting this boss again, just because of how much I love it. I love the amount of strategies that you can use here, and I feel like every single strategy would work. No part of this fight drags on too long, and it all feels incredibly fair. There's plenty of parries, there's plenty of different attacks, and there's plenty of fun to go around, and because of that, the Howling Aces tops my Cuphead list. And with all of those absolutely phenomenal bosses in this phenomenal game wrapped up, thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope this video could provide you some entertainment, and I will see you guys next time. Later!